نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. So we were going through the 6 pillars of Iman. We did Iman in Allah, we did Iman in the angels, we did Iman in the prophets, Iman in the books, and we had just started the section regarding Iman in the Day of Judgment. And you remember, Iman in the Day of Judgment, it begins from everything from the moment of death onwards. So when a person dies, and that is the separation of the soul from the body, the permanent separation as far as this world is concerned, the angel of death comes and takes the soul. From that moment onwards, everything that happens is considered from the belief in the Day of Judgment, because for that person then, his afterlife begins at the point of death, because after death, the person enters into the barzakh. The barzakh, which is the barrier between this world and the next life, because there are 3 places we all live in, 3 places that we all reside in. The first one is this world, this dunya. Then after this, it's the barzakh, in the grave. And then after that, the third one is the afterlife, paradise or hell in the afterlife. So those are the 3 places all of us will pass through: this world, the barzakh in the grave, and then the afterlife, paradise or hell. So last week we mentioned when a person dies, the soul exits differently for a believer compared to a disbeliever. For the believer, the soul exits with ease, like water flows out of a cup. Whereas the disbeliever, it's mentioned, the soul is ripped out, like a hook is ripped out of a bowl of wet wool, how it would rip that wool apart as the hook is pulled out of it. Also, after death, there is fitnatul qabr, the trial of the grave, and that is when the 2 angels, al-Munkar and al-Nakir, they come to an individual, sit him up in his grave, and he is questioned. Who is your Lord? What is your religion? And who is your prophet? And you remember we mentioned there are certain types of people who are exempt from that trial of the grave, as it's known as fitnatul qabr, the questioning of the angels. The prophets and messengers are exempt. Some of the scholars, they said, one of the questions is, who is your prophet? And the prophet and messenger, if they are asked that question, the answer would be themselves. They are the prophet or messenger themselves. So some of the scholars, they mention that would not occur. The prophet or messenger would not be questioned when he was the one selected and chosen by Allah to propagate the religion and to teach people about Islam, about Allah. So the prophets and messengers are exempt from that trial of the grave. You remember we also mentioned that the martyrs are exempt. There was the hadith where the man came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, ما بال المؤمنين يفتنون في القبور إلا الشهيد. That how come all the believers are tested in their graves except the martyrs? قال كفى ببارقة السيوف على رأسه فتنة. The messenger said, it is enough of a trial for him, the martyrs, that the swords they struck upon his neck. So they are exempt. And there are maybe other categories that are exempt also. Then after that, in the grave, there is also the punishments and the blessings of the grave. So a person, after he dies, is now in that barzakh, in the grave, and he will be there up until the day of judgment begins. So during that time that the person is in the grave, then they will either be in the blessings of the grave, or they will be in punishment of the grave. And there are evidences to highlight that this occurs, punishments and blessings of the grave. There is a hadith that mentions how the souls of martyrs are in green birds in paradise during that time of barzakh. And it's mentioned about the wrongdoers of their punishment that occurs in the grave. For example, Pharaoh from the time of Musa alayhi salam, it mentions in the Quran that he is in the punishment of the grave, that he is in the punishment of the grave and will be so up until the day of judgment occurs. It mentions in the Quran, النار يعرضون عليها غدوا وعشيا ويوم تقوم الساعة أدخلوا آل فرعون أشد العذاب. That they, Pharaoh, are being punished day and night, morning and evening with the fire. They are being punished morning and evening with the fire. And then when the hour is established, it will be said, now put them into a more severe punishment. Now, what is the more severe punishment that they will then be transferred into on the day of judgment? That is the punishment of the actual hellfire, proving therefore that the fire they are in right now, morning and evening, is not the actual hellfire yet. Because the ayah says on the day of judgment, they will then be transferred into a more severe punishment. That is the actual hellfire. So what is the fire that they are in already right now? That is the fire of the barzakh. That is the fire, the punishment of the grave that they are in right now. And there are many other evidences proving the punishment of the grave. Something that everybody will know in the prayer. At the end of the prayer, the last thing that you read is, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min adhabil qabr. O Allah, I seek refuge with you from the punishment of the grave. All of us, we ask Allah to protect us from the punishment of the grave at the end of every prayer. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min adhabil qabr. O Allah, I seek refuge in you from the punishment of the grave. And there are other evidences also. There's a narration one time, a scream was heard around Maghrib time, it says in the narration, and the messenger said, they are Jews being punished in their graves. In another narration, the messenger said to the companions, was it not for the fact that I fear upon you, I would have allowed you, or was it not for the fact that I fear death upon you from hearing the screams of the graves, then I would have made dua to Allah to allow you to hear them. So we cannot hear the screams of those in the punishment of the grave. And the Messenger mentioned, was it not that I fear death upon you, that I would have made dua for Allah to allow you to hear that? This indicates we are not capable of hearing that. It is from the unseen what occurs in the grave, and we do not hear it. And because it is from ilmul ghaib, from the unseen, there is no way to physically hear that or experience or witness that. If you put a camera in somebody's grave and you bury them, you will not see anything. You will not hear anything. What is happening there is from the unseen. The question though is, the punishment of the grave, is it something that, and the blessings, is it something that happens to the body of that person, or is it something that happens to the soul of that person? In the grave, is it just the body of the person that experiences the blessings or the punishments? Or is it the soul of the person that experiences that? Both. So there are discussions among the scholars regarding that issue. Some of the scholars, they said it is upon the body. The physical body experiences that. Others, they said, no, that cannot be the case. They said, because if you dig up somebody after a while, you won't see any markings on their body from any punishment. But that is a weak argument to use, because what happens in the grave is from the knowledge of the unseen. So even if you dig somebody up afterwards, or dig many people up, you're never going to see any markings on them. But some of the scholars, they said it is upon the body, some of them said it is upon the soul. But what is correct is that the punishments and the blessings of the grave are on the body and the soul. The body and the soul experience the punishment and the blessings of the grave. So that is something which happens in the barzakh, the punishment and the blessings of the grave. Then after that, and again, there are certain types of people who are exempt from the punishment of the grave. There are certain types of people who would be exempt from the punishment of the grave. One of those mentioned is somebody who dies due to an ailment of the stomach. Somebody who dies due to some disease of the stomach, that they are exempt from the punishment of the grave. And there's a hadith about that, when somebody died and a couple of the companions, they were eager to go to the janazah of that prayer. Or one of them said to the other one, did the messenger not say that whoever dies with a stomach ailment, a stomach disease of some nature, illness, that they are exempt from the punishment of the grave? The other one said, absolutely. So that is something established also, that the one who dies with a disease or illness of the stomach is exempt. It's mentioned about the martyrs again, that they are exempt. There are certain types again mentioned who are exempt from the punishment of the grave. So that is something that we believe in. It is absolutely established and proven that the punishments and the blessings of the grave occur. There is the famous hadith where once the Prophet ﷺ walked past two graves. مر النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم بقبرين فقال إنهما ليعذبان وما يعذبان في كبير لا وهو كبير أما أحدهما فكان يمشي بالنميمة وأما الآخر فكان لا يستنزه من البول أو لا يستتر من البول في رواية. In the hadith it mentions the messenger walked past two graves and said that they are being punished. They are being punished in the grave. Not for something big, as they thought, but it was actually something significant. As for one of them, he used to go around carrying tales. As for one of them, he used to go around carrying stories and tales between people, namima, to cause corruption between people. As for the other one, he never used to look after himself when urinating, so the splashes and impurity, the najasa used to go everywhere. Then in the hadith it mentions, that proves that the punishment of the grave is real. In the hadith it then mentions that the messenger put down two green leaves on their graves and said as long as they are still fresh, as long as they still have their moisture in them, they are still green, then I hope that their punishment will be reduced. So now some people, they believe that it is a sunnah that when you bury somebody to put green leaves or plants on top of that grave. Some people even plant like some type of big plant with green leaves sometimes on top of the grave. But that is incorrect. It is not a sunnah to put green leaves onto the graves or plants on the graves, thinking that the messenger did that and he said, I hope the punishment for them will be reduced as long as these leaves stay green. But that is wrong. The people have misunderstood this hadith. It does not mean that you're supposed to put the leaves and greenery on graves as they do now, big green leaves, they bring them in especially, or big plants. And that is for a number of reasons. Firstly, the Prophet ﷺ through revelation, through inspiration, knew as a fact that those two people were being punished in the grave. When you bury a beloved one, you don't know if they're being punished in the first place yet. You don't even know if they are actually being punished or if they're in the blessings. The messenger knew for a fact they were being punished and he put those down. We don't. When we bury somebody, we have no idea whether they are in blessings or they are in punishment. Secondly, it is not a sunnah because it is something specific to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How do we know that was an action specific to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? The fact that none of the Salaf ever did that. None of the companions ever used to do that. When they buried someone, they never used to put green leaves or plants onto the grave. Never. And if that was a sunnah, absolutely they would have all done it. They would have all followed the way of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They would have followed his lead in that. When burying someone, put the green leaves on there to reduce the punishment of the grave. But they never ever did that. Never ever did the companions used to do that. And this indicates and proves also that it's not a sunnah to do that. If it was, the Salaf would have implemented it and done it for sure. Why would they not help their believers, their believing brothers and sisters who have died? Why would they not try to reduce their punishment if they were in punishment? They never used to do it because they knew this is not a sunnah to implement. It was something specific to the messenger regarding those two graves because he knew that they were being punished by revelation, and that is not something we know. So, there is no sunnah to do that, and it's a mistake that people do that. Then after that, one other issue or some issues to mention in the punishment of the grave. If somebody was never buried, then are they still subject to the punishment of the grave or the blessings of the grave if they were never buried? Maybe they died eaten up by an animal or burnt in a fire, lost out at sea, their body was never buried. Then do they still have exactly the same rulings or not? The answer is of course. It's irrelevant whether they are actually physically buried or not. When a person dies, the barzakh begins for them. And the only reason we call it the blessings and punishments of the grave is because throughout the history of mankind, throughout the history of humans, what has been known is that you bury the dead. Of course, there are now cultures and previously too who burn the bodies and they do other things. But the majority of mankind, what has been known throughout history is that you bury the dead into the earth. So that is why it's known as the punishments and blessings of the grave, because that is mostly what occurs. It is just a title based upon the majority of what actually occurs. But even if somebody is not buried, it doesn't make any difference. They are subject to the punishments and blessings of the grave. So now after that, after the barzakh, and they have been in the barzakh for all that time, then they will remain there up until the day of judgment. And the day of judgment, before it happens, the Prophet ﷺ has told us that there will be certain signs. There will be certain signs before the day of judgment. From the most famous of those signs is the coming of the Dajjal before the end, the return of Jesus, Isa alayhi salam, Gog and Magog, the rising of the sun from the west. These are some of the big signs that will happen before the day of judgment occurs. And there are 10 major signs as the scholars mention, and then there are many other minor signs of the day of judgment leading up to it. In fact, as the scholars have highlighted, there are signs of the day of judgment that have already happened in the past. And there are signs of the day of judgment that are happening right now in the present, around us now in the dunya. And there are signs of the day of judgment that are yet to come. So in that way, you can categorize the signs of the day of judgment as past, present and future. Signs that have already happened, signs that are happening right now, and signs that will happen in the future yet. That is one way to look at the signs of the day of judgment. The other way, of course, is major signs and minor signs. The major signs are the ones at the end with Isa alayhi salam coming back and Dajjal. They are the major signs, and the minor signs are the others. So what are some of the signs that have already gone by? One of the most famous of the signs of the day of judgment that has already gone by and happened is the fact that the final messenger has been sent, and the fact that the final messenger has now died. They are signs from the signs of the day of judgment. That the day of judgment is getting closer. The final messenger has come and gone. And there's a hadith where the messenger said, بُعِثْتُ أَنَا وَسَاعَكَ هَاتَيْنِ, that I have been sent as a messenger, and the day of judgment coming, the gap between these two times from me being sent to the day of judgment occurring is like the index finger to the middle finger. That small gap of size between the index finger and the middle finger, that is all that remains from the sending of the messenger, which was 1500 years ago almost, up until the day of judgment. So the fact that the final messenger has come and gone is one of the signs of the day of judgment approaching. Other signs that are mentioned, the famous ones, like in the hadith of Jibreel, the barefooted shepherds competing to build tall buildings. The buildings, the tall buildings, they are a sign of the day of judgment. It doesn't mean that it's impermissible to build tall buildings. It's completely permissible, nothing wrong with it. Because remember, just because something is a sign of the day of judgment doesn't equals it's bad. There are signs of the day of judgment that are just normal things. It doesn't mean that they're bad or anything. It just means when they happen, it's a sign that the day of judgment is getting closer. So people building tall buildings and skyscrapers is a sign that the day of judgment is getting closer. Not that it's haram or impermissible to build tall buildings. Then in the same hadith it mentions about how the child becomes the master over their parents, and that's a sign of the day of judgment. How the child becomes the master over their parents. The scholars, they said one of the meanings of that could be literally that the parents, the mother was a slave woman and the child is freed, so they become a free man, a free person, but their mother is still a slave. So then the child is like the master over his mother. But other scholars, they said the meaning of this sign of the day of judgment, how children become masters over their parents, is disobedience. That children behave to their parents as though they, the children, are in charge of their parents, in their level of disobedience against their parents. So that is a possible interpretation of that hadith of one of the signs of the day of judgment. Then of course, as we said, those major signs, the sun rising from the west, it mentions in the hadith how one day the sun, because every day the sun seeks permission to rise, and one day it seeks permission to rise and it's not given the permission until eventually it rises back up from the side that it went down, from the west. And when the sun rises from the west and everybody sees that, then everybody will recognize the reality. Everyone will want to believe then, but then it's too late. When the sun rises from the west, no more repentance is accepted after that. It is not accepted for a person to repent after they see that clear sign of the sun rising from the west. And then of course, Dajjal, the coming of the Dajjal, and the Dajjal is a human being. The Dajjal is a human being from among the humans, not like some people say that he is from the jinn or that he's a half-breed between the jinn and the humans. These kinds of things are mentioned in some books. But the reality is he is a human from the humans, the Dajjal. And his descriptions are mentioned in some of the books. How he has curly hair like branches of a tree, and that he is huge in his physical build. Tamim al-Dari in the hadith, he said, I'd never seen a man so big. In the hadith where Tamim al-Dari, who became a Muslim afterwards, one of the companions, before he became a Muslim, he was on a voyage on his ship with other sailors, and they got lost in the ocean. A storm came and battered their ship, and they were lost for a long time until they finally washed up close to this island in the middle of the ocean somewhere. So they got onto their small boat from their big ship onto the small paddling boat, and they paddled over to the island. And when they got to the island, there was this kind of beast with fur all over it, and they said we couldn't even tell where was the front of this beast, where was the back of this beast. And then the beast spoke to them and eventually told them to go up to this old kind of dilapidated building, this old building that was up there. So they went all the way up there. And he mentions in there, he says, I saw this man bigger than anything I'd seen before. Huge man with that curly hair, shackled up, chained up, with the chains around him, around his neck, around his legs, chained up. And that was the Dajjal. It is mentioned in the hadith. They have the conversation, and it's in the long hadith about that conversation. So that Dajjal will come at the end of time, and those are some of the major signs until Isa alayhi salam comes and will kill the Dajjal. So those signs will occur. Then the angel Israfil is the angel who is appointed to blow into the horn on the Day of Judgment. The angel Israfil is appointed to blow into the trumpet on the Day of Judgment. And that signals the beginning of the Day of Judgment, the beginning of the resurrection. And that blowing into the horn, the angel Israfil does that. It's mentioned in the hadith how right now the angel Israfil has the horn at his mouth. Has the horn at its mouth. And is looking at Allah, not blinking, fearing that at any moment the command may come to him to blow the horn. So he will blow the horn. There's a difference of opinion between the scholars. How many times does Israfil blow into the horn? So some scholars say it will be twice. Some scholars say there will be 3 times. The scholars who say that Israfil blows into the horn twice, they say the first time that he blows into the horn is where everybody hears that and they are left in shock and fright and they fall unconscious. Then the second time when he blows into it, they are all resurrected. But on the second opinion, they say the first time that he blows into it, everybody hears it, and in the shock and terror they fall. They are in shock and terror. Then when he blows into it again, the second time now, that's when they fall unconscious. Then when he blows into it the third time is when they are resurrected. So a difference there, whether it is twice or 3 times, but we know that the horn will be blown on the Day of Judgment by Israfil alayhi salam, and that will signal the beginning of the Day of Judgment, the beginning of the resurrection. So then, that resurrection is mentioned in the Quran in many places. It's mentioned in different chapters about the resurrection that occurs. It says, for example, إِذَا زُلْزِلَتِ الْأَرْضُ زِلْزَالَهَا, when the earth shakes, that terrible earthquake, and that will be at that end of time, when it shakes with that terrible shaking, that tremendous earthquake, إِذَا زُلْزِلَتِ الْأَرْضُ زِلْزَالَهَا. Then after that in the surah it carries on and it mentions how the earth will expel its burden. أخرجت الأرض أثقالها, when the earth expels its burden. And that tafsir is the bodies. The burden that the earth expels from itself, as the surah says, is the bodies of all of the deceased people throughout history are expelled from the ground. And when they are expelled, then every single person, all of them will then be on the land of resurrection. All of them gathered on that land of resurrection. And the scholars, they differ. Where is the land of resurrection? When we are all resurrected, where exactly will we all be? Some scholars, they say it's this earth will be resurrected and will be on this earth. Everybody will be gathered on this earth after the resurrection out of the ground. Even though the description of this earth will be different on that day, the mountains will be flattened. It will just be a flat plain of land, not valleys and mountains as we have now. A flat plain of land, and it mentions in some narrations like dough. You know, when you make the flour dough, and at the final stage of the dough, when you've made it into a nice smooth ball, that kind of example is given, the smoothness of how that dough is now after you've done it, and you've got that final piece of dough there, the smooth surface of it. That's how the earth will all be on that day, when everybody is resurrected on it. Some scholars, though, they say when we are all resurrected out, it's not on this earth where we stand. We'll actually be resurrected out and will be gathered on a plain of land elsewhere. It's not this earth. That it will be some other kind of earth. It won't be here where we are all then stood on that plain of land, the plains of resurrection, as they say. So there's two opinions about that, whether it will be exactly this earth where we are resurrected and stood upon, or whether it will be some other land, some other place outside of this earth where we are resurrected and we stand upon. So then, after that resurrection occurs, on that day the sun will be brought close to within a mile, and a mile does not necessitate the mile on the road that we know. There is another type of mile in the Arabic language which is barely a fraction of the mile on the road. So it mentions how the sun will be brought close to the earth, or brought close on that day to that distance. And the people will be sweating. And some will be sweating so much that the sweat goes up to their ankles. And some will be sweating so much it goes up to their knees. With liquid water, the sweat. Some of them sweating so much it goes up to their waists, up to their chests, up to their necks. And so they will be in terror and fright on that day, and they will look at each other, and it says in the narration, they say, أَمَا تَرَوْنَ مَا نَحْنُ فِيهِ. Can you not see what calamity we are in? So then they say, find somebody who can speak to Allah on our behalf to get us out of here. So then they go to the different prophets and messengers to see if any of them will be able to speak to Allah on their behalf, to do the shafa'ah, the intercession on their behalf. So they go to Adam alayhi salam, but he excuses himself. They say, "O Adam, you are the first person, Allah created you with His own hands. You ask, you go speak on our behalf," but he says no, excuses himself and mentions the example of the fruit that he ate that was forbidden. And then they go to Nuh alayhi salam, Noah, and they say, "You are the first messenger sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. 950 years he was calling people, 950 years. Alive all that time giving da'wah, Nuh alayhi salam." But again he excuses himself. Nuh alayhi salam excuses himself. Then they go to others. They go to Ibrahim alayhi salam. They say, "Ibrahim alayhi salam, you are the Khalil of Allah, the most beloved to Allah." But also he excuses himself. They go to Musa alayhi salam, mentioning, "You are Kalimullah, the one who Allah spoke to directly." Allah spoke to Musa directly. Musa heard Allah directly. But again he excuses himself. They go to Isa alayhi salam, he excuses himself until they finally come to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and he is the one who then goes and does that intercession, that shafa'ah. He is the one who then goes and speaks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then the accountability begins and the people are removed from that land of resurrection, removed from that plane of land where they all are and with all that calamity going around them. So then, after that, the different types of accountability, they begin on the Day of Judgment. The different events of the Day of Judgment then begin. In terms of the accountability, everybody is given their books. Everybody is given their books on that day. The books with their deeds written in them. And some people will be given their books in their right hands in front of themselves. Other people will be given their books in their left hands behind their backs. And the scholars, they mention that the ones who are given their books in their right hand, they are the successful ones. But the ones who are given their books in their left hand, and in one ayah it says behind their backs, they are the ones who are unsuccessful. They are the ones who are from the wrongdoers. That is an indication of their wrongdoing, receiving their books in their left hands behind their backs, whereas the believers receive their books in their right hand. All of this is in the Quran, Juz Amma. Most of these ayat are in Juz Amma about أَمَّا مَنْ أَخَذَ كِتَابَهُ بِيَمِينِهِ, the one who takes his book in his right hand, the one who takes his book in his left hand, مَنْ أُوتِيَ كِتَابَهُ بِشِمَالِهِ. All these ayat, different ones are mentioned in the Quran about taking the book in the right hand, in the left hand, behind the back. And in those books, every single deed of the person is written. Every single deed of the person is written. And that's the angels who record all of the deeds of the person. وَإِنَّ عَلَيْكُمْ لَحَافِظِينَ كِرَامًا كَاتِبِينَ يَعْلَمُونَ مَا تَفْعَلُونَ. When Allah mentioned we have the noble scribes writing down everything you do, they know all of what you do. So every deed will be written in those books, small and large, small and big. It mentions in a hadith, وَإِنَّ الْعَبْدِ لَيَتَكَلَّمُ بِكَلِمَةٍ مِّن رِضَى اللَّهِ, and then later on مِّن سَخَطِ اللَّهِ لَا يُلْقِي لَهَا بَالًا يَهْوِي بِهَا إِلَى جَنَّةٍ أَوْ جَهَنَّمٍ. So it mentions maybe sometimes a person says a tiny word of goodness. لا يلقي لها بالا. He doesn't maybe even think about it. Doesn't even think about it, focus on it, nothing. But it's a word of goodness. And it will be written down. And on the Day of Judgment, maybe that one good deed, that one small word of kindness, of goodness, of obedience, could be the reason he enters paradise. And in the same hadith it says maybe sometimes a person speaks a word of evil, a tiny word, he doesn't even pay attention to it or anything, just says it and moves on. But it will be written down, and on the Day of Judgment that tiny word could be the cause and the reason for him to enter the hellfire. So every single deed will be written and recorded and presented to the people in those books, their books of deeds, on the Day of Judgment. That is something established and proven in the Quran. The fact that they will all receive, everybody will receive their books with their deeds in it. It's mentioned about Hadith al-Bitaqa, which we'll get to next time, on the weighing scale on the Day of Judgment. Because there is the weighing scale on the Day of Judgment where the deeds of the people are all placed within. The good deeds on one side, the bad deeds on the other side, and then the weighing happens on that day. And it mentions there about the books, how the books are weighed in that weighing scale too. But we'll do that from next time in more detail regarding the weighing scale on the Day of Judgment. We'll also do a few more topics regarding the Day of Judgment, the weighing scale, the bridge over hellfire, the shafa'ah, the different types of intercession, even for those believers who end up in the hellfire. Then other believers intercede for them and pull them out of the hellfire. That shafa'ah which happens on that day, the weighing scale and all the details about that, the bridge that the people must cross over, the bridge over the hellfire, and also the pond of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We'll go through all of those details from the next lesson, insha'Allah ta'ala. But we'll stop on that section for today. Anybody have any questions or anything up to there?
What's the time span in relation to the major signs, like, you know, the condition of the people at that stage?
Time spans are not mentioned about the time spans. There are some details mentioned, like Isa alayhi salam, when he comes back, he will stay here for
40 years.
40 years? The Dajjal, it will be like that. But Isa alayhi salam comes back for 7 years. It's mentioned Isa alayhi salam comes back for 7 years. Dajjal, it talks about how he will be, how a day will be like a year, another day will be like a month, another day will be like a week, and the rest of the days will be like normal days. So there are those kinds of time spans that are mentioned about certain things, but it's impossible to know exactly how far in between each one, because we don't even know with certainty which sign comes after which, what the order of them is. So it's impossible to know the time spans if we don't even know the order of which one comes when. The first 3 are definitely known: Dajjal, Isa alayhi salam, Ya'juj, Ma'juj. After that, the next 7, the exact chronological order isn't known. So we don't know exactly the time spans, but at that time, right at the end, the final moments, that's when only the disbelievers remain on the earth. Any believers by that time, their souls are taken. Only the worst of the people remain on the earth when Israfil blows the horn.
And on that, Israfil, when he mentioned that he sees Allah, doesn't see as when he's saying he's waiting to give, to blow. Does he see?
The angels, how they see Allah, we don't know any details of how they see. We will see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in paradise, but we don't fully comprehend what we will see. But what extent the angels comprehend, Allah alam, but they see. So Israfil alayhi salam, it mentions in the hadith, he's looking at the throne of Allah, waiting at any moment the command could come. So they see, but how they see compared to our vision, don't know. Anybody else? All right, we'll stop on that for this week then. Inshallah, next week 7:30 or 7:30 p.m. inshallah again next week then. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.